Our speaker of today's session will be Prof. Wee Seng Kui. So Prof. Wee is the Associate Professor at Singapore Institute of Technology and also the Senior Principal Physiotherapist at Tan Tock Seng Hospital, Singapore. He is very renowned in the field of rehabilitative technology, and he has been an active member in the Education Working Group of ISAT. The topic of today will be restoring hope, rebuilding lives, transforming rehabilitation practice with wearable lower limb exoskeleton. So please welcome Prof. Wee.
Okay, thanks Jade and Sarah for introducing me. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Fourier Intelligence for inviting me to share this very exciting topic about wearable exoskeletons. And I'm not an expert in this, so I love to continue to learn from the rest of the world because we know that we have global audience here. So please throw in your questions, your comments, because I really want to learn from all of you. So let's move on. Before I even go to the top problem, I really like to thank all my patients who have given me consent to share their personal life stories and videos with all of you for educational purpose. And this is why I always say that my patients are my teachers. So in today's talk, I'll give you a rough idea about the trend in neuro rehab, what's the evidence in robotic technology, and then zoom in to focus on the lower limb exoskeletons. Now, I think majority of us would have seen this wonderful movie by Tom Cruise, and I remember watching it in 2014, and I was just wowed by it. And can you imagine Tom Cruise wearing such exoskeleton during your physiotherapy or occupational therapy session? It looks great, but it's bulky. So what I'm going to share with you today is something not as bulky. It's going to be very slick, very applicable in the clinical setting. So I hope you can consider using it for your patients. So the current trend in new rehab is that we have to complement the use of advanced rehab technology with our conventional therapy to optimize patient outcome. I think for the longest time, we have been relying on a pair of hands to deliver care, but now let's consider using technology to enhance patient care because depending on what sort of robotics your clinics may have, we recognize that robots can help to reduce the strain on therapists doing the work. And more importantly, it provides very objective data because with a robotic system and the engineering works put in, hardcore objective data are captured. And that is very useful for us to show our patients in order for them to appreciate the improvement that they have made over time. And that can actually motivate them and empower them to be an active member of this rehab process. And from the research angle, you can see in the lower half of the two pictures from a screenshot of the bionics exoskeleton. It provides things like swing time, step length, something that our patients can appreciate. So it is a valuable tool for research as well. And all this is based on our deep understanding about neuroscience and neuroplasticity. So I'd like to point you to this excellent paper by Jeffrey Klein, published in 2008. It's free for download on the internet. So please have a look at it. It's wonderful. And I still refer to it on and off as I reflect on my own practices. So it covers the 10 principles of neuroplasticity, and that's precisely what these robotics are built upon, based on this. So thanks to the wonderful engineers and clinicians to put their brains together to create something like this. And we all know that robots never fatigue unless the battery runs out. Otherwise, it can provide a very intensive, very repetitive, task-specific training for the patient. And it's wonderful that therapy no longer is confined to your boring therapy gym, right? I think it's wonderful if you can take your patient out to the real world, to the garden, to practice walking in this instance. So it really changes the way patient engages with therapy and motivates them. So let's talk a little bit about exoskeleton, but before that, I think it's useful information to have. because you're going to get all these questions from your patient. Am I able to walk again after a spinal cord injury or after a stroke? So I think research have clearly shown that if you have an AJA lesion, I think the chance of having some ambulatory ability is less than 5% 1 year post SCI. And if you're Asia B, only about 33% becomes ambulatory. And if you're Asia C, the chances of ambulation is as high as 75%. So I think knowing all these facts will help you counsel your patient and support them through this challenging rehab journey. And for the stroke, a large percentage will be able to attain some degree of ambulatory abilities. It depends on what level of assistance. So robotic technology can play a critical part here to optimize their outcome. Let's take, for example, in our conventional physiotherapy session, that may be about half an hour session, patient only get to practice up to about 100 steps in that half an hour session. And guess what? With robotic technology, patients can practice up to 1,000 steps. So can you imagine how intensive is that? And that is what will facilitate neuroplasticity to take place. And I'll be sharing with you some research evidence later on. And this beautiful slide clearly shows that recovery continues way beyond the chronic phase if you provide the right appropriate therapy for patients. And that's what we constantly drive ourselves to do, to seek for better solutions for patients to recover at a different level. Now let's talk about this common sight that we see in some therapy clinic. A nice body weight supported treadmill is a form of technology, but it's still very laborious that requires up to 3% to facilitate the patient to practice walking. And sometimes when the therapist or therapy assistant get distracted, patient's gait pattern may not be that consistent. Now, and it's wonderful today to see this translation from basic sciences and animal studies to clinical application. So be it a tethered robotic system or wearable exoskeleton, you'll hear more about it later. Now, so where does exoskeleton sit in this whole rehab picture for patients? It sits right there, whereby it can serve patients with even poor trunk control up to those that require some supervision in their ambulation, as shown in this diagram. So I'm going to just now focus on powered wearable exoskeleton. Now, so Fourier first developed this X1 exoskeleton, and I think this video depicts the possibilities that can be delivered to our patients, be it for home use, or be it having the ability to get up to community to enjoy leisure activities with their loved one. And I think this video clearly shows such amazing development in the field of rehab that can change someone's lives. And me and my colleagues had the privilege to meet Professor Sankai, and I think many of you may have heard of this Japanese hybrid assistive limb, HAL for short, by Cyberdyne. And he crafted this.
The suit will allow a wearer to easily carry a man weighing 60 kilograms. Sankai hopes to complete a marketable model next year.
So it's wonderful to see that there's not just lower limb exoskeleton, there are now further development in the upper limb exoskeleton as well. Well, it will take me another hour to share with you on that. But let's focus on the lower limb exoskeleton. You can see that even for the older person, we all know that silver tsunami has hit almost every country worldwide. Such exoskeleton can definitely make the caregiver's role a lot easier. You can see these two elderly couple, the husband, can just assist his wife along with an exoskeleton. And that doesn't mean that with exoskeleton, you can throw away with all the mobility aids. Some patients may still require mobility aids to couple the exoskeleton to move around. And in Poland, I think this guy has a incomplete spinal cord injury, exoskeleton can also be coupled with a body weight kind of support or ceiling hoist system over a treadmill to provide also intensive training. And you can see that she has achieved a wonderful outcome as well. And my center has an bionics exoskeleton. You hear more about it. But at the Rehab Week in Toronto just a couple of years back, I have a privilege to try the Indigo. And Indigo is also a lovely exoskeleton because it's modular in nature. That means the battery pack at my waist, as you can see in the video, can be taken apart. And then the upper and lower limb segment of the exoskeleton can be taken apart. So with this modular nature of this exoskeleton, it can be thrown inside a backpack, and someone in a wheelchair can drive out somewhere, fix it up, and be able to walk around. And Rex is from New Zealand. So there's also the Phoenix suit, and it's wonderful to see with such exoskeleton, it can actually improve the participation level within the ICF framework that all of us are aware of. And you can see this dad having the opportunity to enjoy a soccer game with his young child. So I think the future is now. It's no longer what you see in science fiction movies. And from Israel, there's a rewalk with a clinic version as well as a personal mobility device version, meaning a home version. So after about 3 to 6 months of intensive training by the therapist, and if the user is deemed safe to operate it him or herself, they can actually purchase one. And this rewalk is also wonderful, much of the Forios X1. They also enable someone to be able to climb up and down stairs, hence opening up more possibility in terms of community outings with their loved ones. And from France, you have this wonderful development. It's a self-balancing exoskeleton. I think the previous exoskeleton that you saw, currently it hasn't got a self-balancing mechanism, so it looks slick. But for this self-balancing exoskeleton from France, it's bulky for a reason, to be able to kind of rebalance itself with a wider base of support that enables someone to reach out even beyond arm's length. So a wonderful exoskeleton to consider as well. So what's the evidence of low limb exoskeleton, low limb robotics in general, right? I think in the Cochrane review published in 2017, it clearly shows that we cannot just rely on robotics alone. You have to couple with conventional physiotherapy that includes balance as well as overground gait training to make it work. And it tends to benefit those who are non-ambulant to begin with. As for exoskeleton literature, it shows that it can help even those with subacute stroke as well as SCI. And just to encapsulate within one slide, there are lots of wonderful clinical evidence out there that shows that exoskeleton not only improves walking per se, but also help to improve the trunk control of the user as well, because you can imagine the dynamic weight shift required, and that really forces the trunk musculature to work hard. And we have seen a successful story of improvement in trunk control as well. And with intensive training with the exoskeleton, it can also improve bowel bladder function of our patients, as well as reduction in spasticity. So wonderful, wonderful evidence out there that hopefully motivates you to explore the usage of exoskeleton. And in a recent publication, Professor Mortini from Italy highlighted this very critical point. What's so different about, say, a robotic system tethered to a treadmill, right, versus a wearable exoskeleton? Because can you imagine when you walk over ground using such exoskeleton, the patient get that vestibular stimulation, they get the visual spatial appreciation of the surrounding. And that's what makes it so powerful in terms of the benefits of exoskeleton. And as mentioned earlier, it definitely helps to improve the balance as well as the trunk control aspects. Now, way back in 2005, when there are a lot of research revolving around Hokoma's local man, this wonderful fMRI study clearly shows that with intensive robotic therapy, it actually improves the cortical activation of the parts of the brain involved in locomotion. So it's one of the very clear signs for clinicians about the benefits of robotics. And in 2011, similar findings were shown as well, increased cortical activation before and after intensive robotic therapy. So this is just another slide to show you. And now, how about the literature on exoskeleton? I think it's so wonderful to see this recent publication that it's a randomized controlled trial, a group receiving exotherapy and another group receiving conventional overground gait training. And you can see from this diagram, there is an increased brain connectivity in the exoskeleton group. So again, very promising results that will encourage clinicians to adopt this. And also more recently, Professor Mottini and the team studied this, and it's just over one session of exotherapy compared to overground walking. If you look at this colorful diagram, you can see increased EEG signal in the exotherapy group, right? It appears darker in red. And this is just within a single session of intensive exoskeletal training. So they propose that it can induce short-term neuroplastic changes. So can you imagine with one session you see such a change? What about 25 or even 40 sessions of such intensive exoskeletal therapy? I believe that it will induce further brain changes and neuroplasticity. So a Korean group looked in general a tethered robotic system. And it was very interesting because they look at one group that started robot-assisted therapy early on versus another group, a pretty homogeneous group that started robotic therapy later. And this brain imaging study clearly shows an increased cortical activation if you start the robotic therapy early. Again, a very important take-home point that I think if your facility has such technology, we should introduce that for early rehabilitation. And looking at the robotic group and the control group, you can see an increased brain connectivity as shown in the bright red color in the robotic therapy group. This is another brain imaging to show you the difference between the two groups. And in the group that started early versus the group that started later, again, a very simple approach therapy. While conventional therapy is great, perhaps we should use robotic therapy to inject into the therapy program early on so that patient can have intensive therapy that will induce good and adaptive neuroplasticity. So the take-home point is that early start of such therapy is critical because it has been shown to facilitate cortical reorganization in these parts of the brain as listed here. And in a recent systematic review published this year, again, the review clearly suggests the huge potential of such exoskeleton that can help to change lives of our patients, right? Because they get verticalized early, they get the intensive task-specific training of walking in this instance, and it can help to also reduce other secondary side effects of being bed-bound and poor mobility. So what I'm going to share with you next are numerous videos of my patient, and I'm going to share with you how I use bionics exoskeleton on different patient groups. Let's start with TBI, which is one of my specialized areas. Now, this lady unfortunately had a TBI from a road traffic accident, and you can straight away tell how laborious it is during our conventional therapy session to get her to practice few steps of walking. And what limits her opportunity to practice her walking is actually because the therapist and the therapy assistant got fatigued. But with the exoskeleton, you can see that one therapist can actually get patient to move around in various environments. So this is a screenshot from the Bionics exoskeleton, just to again prove what I've said earlier. Remember, I mentioned that in half an hour of training using robotics, patient get to practice up to 1,000 steps. And in this lady, she practiced up to close to 1,300 odd steps. And in 1 hour of therapy, she get to practice up to 3,000 steps. So it is very, very intensive. And the reason why we can gradually get her there is because she has shown improvement in her endurance as well. That's why she said she can tolerate walking further. And after 30 sessions of the exotherapy, look at that. She has walked literally or practiced walking 15 kilometers. And eventually she has shown improvement in her hip flexors, her dynamic weight shift, and therefore her knee control during stance has also improved, and her swing through has also improved.